Iowa Public Radio is your home for news, music, and culture. And the Iowa Public Radio app is your connection. Catch the latest news, enjoy music picked for you, discover something new about the state you call home. Connect to IPR, no matter where you are. Download the app for your Apple or Android device in the App Store, or visit ipr.org/app.
This is Garden Variety, a horticulture podcast from Iowa Public Radio and Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. I'm Charity Nebbe. It has been a very good year for spring blossoms, but most of them have faded, and now it's time for other flowers to step into the spotlight. Today, we'll talk about late spring and early summer blooming perennials like peonies, shasta daisies, and Siberian irises. We'll also talk about some beautiful native blossoms. Erin Stile, Iowa State University Extension horticulture specialist, is here. Hello, Erin.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being here. And I think we should start with the classics. Peonies are already blooming, which is a little early for Iowa, although they were a little early. Memorial Day weekend is their normal weekend to shine, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I think the cool temperatures that much of the state is experiencing really slowed things down, which is fine. They're still doing quite well. It's pretty hard not to talk about peonies this time of year. They're just so, this is their moment to shine. Absolutely.
And there are so many different varieties of peonies. Do you know how many there are? Because there seems to be endless.
Yes, hundreds and hundreds. And they're kind of, a lot of times, because there's so many cultivars, we kind of think of them as being in kind of three major groups. There's the herbaceous peonies. These are the ones most of us are familiar with, that have the big flowers and die to the ground every year. We also have tree peonies, and the name is a little misleading. They basically have woody stems at the base, and so they don't die completely to the ground in the winter. And what's nice about tree peonies, they bloom earlier, so most of them are already finished or finishing up right now. And they also have colors. Herbaceous peonies tend to be pink and white and reds. Tree peonies also have kind of a yellowish color. There's some really nice kind of tried and true variety called, there's an Edo peony, which is a cross between those two. It also has really nice yellow color. That one is called Bartzilla. And it's nice to have kind of that bright, cheery yellow this time of year.
Yeah, for sure. And I think because people who have lived in Iowa a long time may kind of take peonies for granted because there are peonies on every farmstead pretty much everywhere. And if you sometimes when you buy a house, you just inherit a few peonies and they just bloom reliably. They are incredibly long-lived, aren't they?
Yes, they are. They are very reliable, long-lived perennials, probably some of the most long-lived ones. And that's one of the reasons why we often inherit them. They're some of the few perennials that if you completely leave them alone, they still do their thing. A lot of other perennials over time can be overtaken or die back over decades of not caring for them. I think this is also one of the reasons and they tend to bloom for us around Memorial Day. This is one of the reasons we often see them in cemeteries too.
Right. What are some of the problems that peonies can develop?
Yeah, so we do see this time of year, the biggest issue we run into is just floppy plants. The flowers are so big, especially on the double forms, that if it gets wet or even if it's not wet, the flowers will bend and flop over, and then you can't appreciate them as well. And so that really, you can support them now, but the best way to deal with this is actually to preemptively put a ring. They're actually usually called peony rings. It's just like a wire ring that you put over the plant, allow it to grow through, and then that can help support the stems when they're in flower.
I also find that it encourages me to cut them and bring them into the house as well, which, sometimes with flowers, I feel guilty about doing that because I want to give them the opportunity to bloom as long as possible outside. But peonies, I feel like I'm rescuing them.
Yeah, especially if they're flopping over. You might as well enjoy them inside, too.
Absolutely. All right. So let's talk about another classic. How about the shasta daisy?
Yeah, shasta daisies. So this is that classic white and yellow daisy flower. And what's interesting is that a lot of us in our gardens actually have two different species that we run into that have these kind of classic white and yellow daisy-shaped flowers. One is Shasta daisy. This is a very nice garden plant, clump-forming, large, usually flowers bigger than 2 inches across, larger leaves, just a real nice garden plant. Then there's oxeye daisy. And oxeye daisy is kind of a thug sometimes, especially when it comes to reseeding. And it's very easy to confuse the two. And so what you're looking at, if it seems to be really aggressive and spreading, it's probably oxeye daisy. And if it's a very well-behaved garden plant, it's probably Shasta daisy. And for that reason, we do absolutely prefer Shasta daisy over this oxeye daisy. Plus, Shasta daisy has larger flowers. It tends to be a little bit taller, so you can appreciate it better. And of course, it doesn't spread all over the place.
Right. I have a lot of oxeye daisy, which has spread all over the place. And is it considered to be invasive? Does it outcompete native plants?
It has the potential to. It's certainly not the worst of our garden plants that can get really aggressive in their spreading. But it can be. It's not native. It's a European or a Eurasian native, and so it is something that if you're not careful, you can accidentally let get out of control, and you have really mixed feelings about it because it is a very attractive plant.
It's very
in
pretty,
bloom.
yes, and in full bloom right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's pretty easy to get flowers to bloom in the sunshine. Let's talk about some shade flowers as well. At least let's start with part shade.
Yeah, so there's a lot of really lovely part shade plants. So this is stuff that gets maybe 4 hours of direct sunlight or less. This is like the really kind of the bright shade garden or the dappled shade, or maybe something that gets morning sun but afternoon shade. These can be challenging spots because it feels like sometimes it's too much light for the shade lovers and not enough light for the sun lovers. And so that's where things like geranium or cranesbill can kind of fill in. This is a really lovely perennial. This isn't to be confused with the annual geranium. That's a completely different genus. It's called pelargonium. This is the true geranium. Its genus name is geranium. And there are some native, but they're also most of the garden varieties are from Europe and Asia, and they're just lovely in part shade, pink, but most of the time kind of purpley, violet, blue colored flowers. Some of them have interesting, almost red fall color later in the season, and they tend to be very nice sized perennials for our garden. They often are somewhere between 12 and 24 inches tall, and they don't spread, but they do get really lanky. Or kind of sprawly. So they have a crown, but they kind of sprawl out and take up a lot of real estate, which is sometimes really welcome.
Right, especially in the shade. How long do the blooms tend to last?
So most geraniums will have a nice flush of bloom, kind of mid to late spring, maybe early summer, and then they kind of sporadically throw flowers up the rest of the year. And that main bloom will be around for a couple of weeks. And then, you'll get a flower here and there throughout the rest of the season, which is nice.
All right. And while we're talking about part shade, you also want to talk about Jacob's ladder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is a fun one. We see this a lot in the stores this time of year in the garden centers because it looks great in a container. It's a very easy plant to sell in the container. They're not fern-like leaves, but they're very finely divided, which means that they complement a lot of shade plants, which tend to have larger leaves. They complement them pretty well. And there's a lot of really cute cultivar names out there, like Stairway to Heaven and Heaven Scent, and scent is like smell, not like the male. And so they are often variegated. Stairway to Heaven is a variegated one, Golden Feathers, Brie d'Anjou. All of these have these bright variegated leaves, which in part shade really stand out, which is really nice. And they're also front of the border plants, but they throw up these cute, almost bell-shaped flowers on a stalk about this time of year that are really easy to appreciate in the front of the border.
Yeah, really delicate, really pretty. Let's talk about some native shade plants.
Yeah, most of these are actually wrapping up right now, but I couldn't help but bring up Jack in the Pulpit. It is actually one of my favorites for the shade. It's just such a cool flower. And you wouldn't think a flower that's mostly green and kind of reddish, dark red would be that cool. But, oh, man, this is just a fun plant. A woodland native. Of course, it gets that name because it has that a spathe, which is kind of a leaf-like structure that surrounds a spadix, which is that little kind of pillar that's in the middle of that spathe. And that's the jack inside the pulpit, if you will. The other cool thing about jack in the pulpit is sometime in the summer, it will set seed. And those seeds are really pretty, too. They don't tend to last very long because the wildlife really snatched them up. But they're bright red and kind of in almost like a cone shape on top of the stem as it dies back, because this one does die back usually around midsummer.
Let's talk about bellwort, too.
I know. So this is a fun one. This one is also finishing up right now. This is another native, woodland native. It forms a clump that kind of gets larger and larger with time. And it always has kind of it's a relatively short plant, 12 inches or so. And it always kind of have a droopy kind of look to it. The leaves have a twist in them, and they kind of flag downward. And then maybe 2 weeks ago is when we saw most of these bell-shaped yellow flowers that are nodding down pop out on this plant. And it's just really charming. And I am kind of a lot of stuff in the spring I feel like tends to be very pink and lavender and purple and blue. And so when you see a yellow, it's kind of fun this time of year.
Yeah. All right, we have about a minute. So let's talk about some of the plants that reseed and can really fill in an area.
Yeah. Yeah, so these are also plants that some of them do fairly well in part shade too. This is the columbine that we're so familiar with the red and yellow flowers. Spiderwort or Tradescantia, also called dayflower. This one reseeds quite a bit potentially, but has pretty blue flowers that start this time of year. And Golden Alexander is another native, again a yellow. I didn't realize I had such a strong theme here. But what's fun about this one is that it's good in full sun. It does okay in part shade. It's also a host for black swallowtail butterflies because it's in that same plant family as parsley and fennel and some of those others. So that makes it kind of doubly nice. And all of these reseeders, if you want to reduce the seeding, you just have to deadhead once the flowers are done.
Aaron Stile, Iowa State University Extension horticulture specialist. For more gardening information and tips, please subscribe to our Garden Variety newsletter. Find out more at iowapublicradio.org/garden. I'm Charity Nebbe. Garden Variety is a production of Iowa Public Radio and Iowa State University Extension. It's produced by me, Aaron Stile, Caitlin Troutman, and the Iowa Public Radio talk show team. For more garden goodness, please subscribe to our Garden Variety newsletter. Just go to iowapublicradio.org/garden. I'm Charity Nebbe. See you next time.